This video is going to show you how to download and install a web server to run on your Mac and how to install WordPress into that web server, and then how to install a SiteGrinder built theme into your WordPress installation. Before we talk about how, let's talk a little bit about why. The reason you might want to run a web server on your local computer is because it means you can test things that you normally test over the internet, but do so much more quickly because they're right on your machine. It also means that you don't have to put things up where people in the general world at large might discover them before they're ready. So for example, if you're playing with a WordPress theme that you've built with SiteGrinder and you want to make sure it looks right before you actually apply it to a live blog, you can make a fake blog on your local machine, apply it to that, and see how it looks. So it's pretty handy, and it's also going to give you a better understanding of exactly what web servers do and how they work. Web servers are really just programs that listen for special kinds of requests. Normally these requests come from web browsers over the internet, so your browser goes out to some web server on some web host somewhere and says, give me this document, give me this graphic, and the web server does that. Interestingly, they can also be running together on your computer. So you could have a web server just running right there on your laptop and a web browser talking to it without ever going out to the internet. So another cool thing is that you can have a web server locally running, and even if you're not connected to the internet, you can still test how browsers interact with your pages. To install a web server, you need first to download it, and the one that we recommend for the Macintosh is called MAMP. It stands for Macintosh Apache MySQL PHP. And luckily, you're a SiteGrinder user, so you don't have to know what all of those things are. But it's a very powerful and is basically a fully featured web server, but it will be just running on your local machine. To get it, you'll go to the website mamp.info. And when you go to mamp.info, you'll see a download link right there on the front page. So we'll just click it. After we download and unzip MAMP, we'll get a disk image. When we mount the disk image, this is what it'll look like. To install it, we simply drag the MAMP folder right here in the window to the little applications alias right here. So just drag and drop. And then once we have it in our applications folder, we're ready to launch it and start using it. And here's my applications folder now with MAMP in it. And I'll double click MAMP. And we'll just take a quick look at what we have in here before we launch it. The MAMP app, obviously, is what you run. That is the actual web server. And the other thing that's in here that's really important to understand is this htdocs folder. By default, MAMP is going to make this the folder into which you should put all of your web pages and anything else that you want to serve from this web server. And that means that we're going to end up putting our WordPress folder in here once we download that. And any pages that we want to test from SiteGrinder's Content Manager, we will essentially use the Content Manager to upload into this folder. So that means that you won't be able to access anything else on your computer other than things that are in this folder. Now, you can change this folder. You can use a MAMP setting to change to, say, a sites folder that's in your documents folder or something like that. That's up to you. We'll, for the purposes of this demonstration, stick with the default, which is this htdocs folder. I will give you one tip here. Because this folder is inside the MAMP folder that's in your applications folder, if you upgrade MAMP by replacing the entire MAMP folder, you will also delete the htdocs folder. So that's a good reason to use a separate folder outside of the MAMP applications folder. Now we will launch MAMP, and you see it's just a tiny little dialog here that you will see once it launches. And then what it does is it launches its so-called start page, and that's what we're looking at right now in Safari. What's cool about this is actually a web page now being served to us from MAMP, and we can see that that's true if we look at the URL at the top here. This may not be something that you're used to if you've never run a web server before, but you'll notice that instead of a domain name like medialab.com or an IP address even, there's just this word localhost. And in this case, the localhost is followed by a colon and the number 8888. So let me explain the two of those. Localhost means this computer. So don't look for this web page over the internet. Look at it right here on this computer. The number 8888 is called a port. You don't really need to know that, but basically when you're running possibly multiple web servers on one computer, you need a way to determine which thing you want to make your requests to. So, for example, the SiteGrinder engine is its own kind of web server, and it has its own unique port number. The port number for MAMP is by default 8888. So again, it's just kind of the address of this MAMP web server. It just allows the web browser to talk specifically to MAMP rather than, say, to the SiteGrinder engine. Every time you access something from MAMP, you will be using this localhost :8888. On this start page, there are a few things that we want to pay attention to. One is that we have a username down here. That name is root, and the default password is root. Now, these security concerns aren't that big a deal right now because this is only something that can be accessed from other programs on our computer. But if we were to actually use MAMP to provide things to other computers over the internet, in other words, we'd be running a public web server, essentially, we'd want to make sure to change that password to something more secure. The other thing that we want to notice here is that there are some useful links in this menu at the top. The main one that you're going to be working with in this demo, and probably the only time you'll ever really interact with any of these controls, is to go to this phpMyAdmin. phpMyAdmin is a way to create and modify SQL databases. Those are SQL databases. And the only thing we're going to use this for right now is just to create our database. And it's actually very simple. There are a lot of complicated controls around here, but luckily we can ignore all of them. Simply zero in on this create new database control. The default name for a WordPress database is WordPress, which just makes it really easy to remember. You could name it something else, but I'd recommend just keeping it WordPress for simplicity. At this point, we click the Create button, and we're basically done with phpMyAdmin, and hopefully we will never have to come back here again. Now we're ready to download and install WordPress into our MAMP web folder. To do that, we're going to wordpress.org. It's important to go to wordpress.org rather than wordpress.com because wordpress.org is where the download is found. We click the download button here. For some reason, we now have to click another download button on this page, and then WordPress downloads. Here's my download folder, and you'll see we have the original zip file that was downloaded from wordpress.org, and I've unzipped it to a folder called WordPress. Over here, we have the MAMP folder, remember, that's in our applications folder, and here's our htdocs folder. Let's go ahead and double-click it, and we'll see that it's currently empty. So what I'm going to do is just drag WordPress in here. And now WordPress is in our htdocs folder. So at this point, what we want to do is go to a browser and actually view the default page that is inside the WordPress folder because it's a configuration page that will let us set up WordPress. So believe it or not, we're almost done here. To log into WordPress now, I'm going to use that same localhost :8888 and slash here. And then I'm going to just type in WordPress. Now, the reason that's going to work is because WordPress is right there at the top level of that htdocs folder. So, for example, any file, if we had a file called mypage.html that was inside that htdocs folder, we could just type that in here instead of WordPress. But what I'm going to do is hit enter. And when I do that, the browser is going to ask MAMP for the default page that's in the WordPress directory there. And that turns out to be this configuration page. WordPress notices that it's not yet configured, so it asks us to go ahead and create a configuration file. It's the only button to click, so let's click it. Now, normally you'd have to read this text, but since I'm guiding you through this, just ignore it. Click Let's Go. And now we actually have to do something more complicated than click the only button, but it's not too hard. Remember the database name that we used was WordPress. If you happen to be rebellious and pick a different name, you're going to want to type that in here. Now we're going to want to type in root and root. Remember that was the username and password that we saw earlier in the MAMP settings window. Now we have our host name, localhost. We're not going to change that. We're not going to change our table prefix. We're just going to go ahead and, at this point, click the submit button. And finally, one more single button page. We click the button. And now we're basically rocking and rolling in WordPress. So At this point, a lot of this stuff is kind of up to you. So, for example, the site title, well, this is not a real WordPress site, right, that's going to be available to the world. It's just for your testing. So name it whatever you want. Let's call it test blogs or something like that. Username, just leave it admin or change it to your own login if you want. I'll just type in a easy to remember password here. Probably you won't need to put in your email address, but if you need to retrieve a password or something like that, you might want to put your actual email address in there. Remember, this is you can always just delete WordPress, delete the WordPress database, and start all over again, because this is just for testing. This is not your real WordPress site. So a lot of this stuff, if you make a mistake, it doesn't really matter. Just start over. So now we click Install WordPress. And now all we have to do is click Login. Login. And here is our WordPress dashboard, just exactly as if we were logged into WordPress, a WordPress blog online. And here we can go to our appearance page and set our theme if we want to. But what we're more interested in, and actually there's a change theme button right here too. But what we're more interested in is how do we install themes or new themes from SiteGrinder. So I'm just going to quickly cover that. So we go back to the Finder where we see the MAMP folder that's in our Applications folder. And here again is our htdocs folder where we put everything that we want to access through this local web server. So I'll double click that. And remember, this includes anything. If you just have a sample site of any kind, or just an HTML file you want to take a quick look at in a real web browser served from a web server, you can just copy it right in here. And the URL for it will just start with localhost :8888/ and then whatever the name of that file is, or maybe it's a directory. So in this case, we only have right now this WordPress folder. So let's crank it open. And there's a ton in there, but all we really care about is this WP content folder. I'll double click it. Now here, notice there is a folder named themes. So that's what you're going to want to remember, and you might even want to make an alias for it. But the themes folder is where themes go. And it's pretty simple, because if we go in there, we'll see there's already one theme in there, the default theme called 2010. If we have a SiteGrinder theme that we've built and it's somewhere else on our disk, we can just drag it in here, the whole folder, because themes are contained within a folder named after the theme. The other thing you can do is deploy a theme directly to this themes folder from SiteGrinder, and then you can apply it. And then you can also upload it to your actual WordPress installation directly from this folder if you want to, using an FTP program. And that's how you install a web server and WordPress and a theme using a Macintosh.